I'm here at a very, very rainy Bayford Meadows circuit at the Project One headquarters to pick up something really special.
Back in 1998, Project One were one of the top teams in the TKM class in UK karting.
And to this day, there are still categories like 100 UK run by Access Karting that use chassis from the 90s. So if you're serious about winning one of those championships, then it would be a good idea to be using one of those Project One chassis built back in the late 90s. And that's why today, we're doing something a little bit special. A short time ago, the team at Project One were moving a classic Formula Ford car in one of their storage warehouses. And behind it, they found some chassis which hadn't been touched since 1998. Fresh, bare frames that had just come off the production line and been forgotten about. And that's why I say this is an exciting project, because we have one of them right here. Right, let's get this thing in the car now and then head off to Dartford Karting, where I need to buy all of the rest of the parts to put this together. So I have a huge list here of parts. This is the list of stuff that I need, so quite a few bits. Right, so short rear hubs, medium rear hubs. Let's go for a medium. Should I get a spare as well? Probably should, shouldn't I? And then I need a sprocket carrier and sprocket protector. Okay, well let's go for the big one. Exhaust mount, chassis protected. The exhaust springs, exhaust wrap, exhaust flex. Okay, next thing is pedals. Brake rod, the bar with that's threaded on the ends with the device overheated. I only need to then film it when there's a pile of stuff coming. I'll do a time lapse. There was so much stuff there to pick from their stores that it's going to take about 15 minutes for Dartford Karting to make a pile on the desk. So I've come for a coffee and I'll go back over there and try and collect it in a little while. Well, that was a lot of parts and a lot of money, but let's not talk about that. I'm going to get this home, lay it out on the floor and show you exactly what we've got, and then I'll talk to you about the next steps. We've just unpacked everything, as you saw there. We've got everything down on the floor. It looks awesome. I can't wait to build it. But what I need to do first is get the chassis painted. And tomorrow, I'll give you a full update on what on earth this is all about and what happens next. So I probably owe you a little bit of an explanation about why I'm moving category when I was so heavily invested in GX UK over the last season. First of all, I had such a good time in GX UK, but I was definitely missing out on one element, and that was a bit of the driving challenge. And specifically, I mean throttle control. I wanted something with a bit more power that was a little bit more challenging to drive on the limit. And in the 100 UK series, although it's not as fast as some karts I've raced in the past, it's certainly a big step up in pace from GX UK and a step down in terms of grip from the tyres. So I'm really looking forward to that difficulty of trying to be competitive whilst learning this new formula. And in addition to that, some of the drivers in 100 UK have incredible CVs, and I really want to challenge myself up against them. You have drivers like Ben Klukas.
And now Klukas has gone! What a drive!
Former British champions who have also raced very competitively in cars, and a number of the drivers at the front of the grid in 100 UK were former factory drivers for kart teams back when these karts were in their heyday. So really, this entire project, the build, and then going into the racing next season is going to be a massive challenge for me. You're certainly not going to see me winning the number of races you saw in GX UK this season, and I'm really looking forward to that. And then the final component of this decision was the fact that this particular kart, this brand new, untouched kart became available, and really that just made it too good an opportunity to miss. Having said all of that, I really wanted to keep in the Access Karting family and continue racing on that package of races, and that means I'm still going to be pitting with Alex Van Gien and my brother Paul at each of the races. We'll just be out in different heats at different times. Okay, so the big work starts now. This kart is entirely unfinished, nothing's been done whatsoever, and I've got a big box of parts behind me at the back of the garage there that all need to be assembled and fitted to this kart. But first of all, we're going to go and take it to be powder coated with Alex down at Powder Pros, and that's what you're going to see next. So thank you to Alex at Powder Pros for another amazing job. If you want your kart powder coated just like this, check out Powder Pro's Instagram page and contact Alex. So I'm going to show you it out in the sunshine because the colour really looks amazing. Project One actually gave me a box of the powder that they would have used all that time ago. So what you're going to see here is quite original, but I need to point out this is probably one of the only original things you're going to see on this kart. I'm not keeping this in period, aside from what the regulations mandate. Anywhere I can get away with using something modern, I will do, and that includes sticker kit and all the components I'm going to use on the kart. So you're going to see that as we build it. But for now, let's reveal this kart and show you exactly how good it looks. So there she is, Purple Peril Mark II. And now I have a huge build process in front of me where I need to figure out how all of this goes together. I've laid out all the parts on a shelf neatly over here. Finally, it's time to start putting this thing together. So join me, let's do it. So where to start? Now, I mentioned not many things on this kart are going to be original spec. One of those things is the pedals. These would normally have a thin, simple pedal. I've gone a bit flash here with these anodized aluminium, beautiful, complex looking adjustable pedals. Now I need to try and actually fit them on here because they're not designed for this kart. The holes here aren't the same size as the holes here, so let's try and fit them on. But there's one more problem, and that is that the pedal bolt holes here and over here are not straight. They've actually been welded on wonky at the factory. And what that means is I've had to actually bend the bolts so that when the pedal is sitting on the bolt, it's flat. Now, goodness knows whether or not this is going to work. I need to try and figure this out. You're going to see me try and figure it out. Let's give it a try. And just to show you what I mean about how wonky these are welded on, here we go. Welcome to retro karts.
I'm like 2 hours in and I've just about managed to bodge the pedals on. I'm not really happy with them and I'm going to show you why. Essentially, look how wonky the pedal goes if the bolt moves. Not ideal, and the problem is every time you press the pedal it moves the bolt a little bit, but I've ordered some different bolts. I'm going to just try and come back to this when I can. I need to start doing some other things. So next up, let's begin building the front, starting with fitting the bearing at the bottom of the steering column. Everything so far has taken ages, but we've got a steering wheel on. We're going to go stub axles next, and then we can really kind of build the front end up and start to make it look more like a go-kart. And literally immediately I've run into a problem, and that is that I didn't realise we needed to mask these holes here, and so actually now the top hat doesn't fit into the hole, so I'm going to have to somehow scrape this out. Really annoying because it's beautiful paintwork, but I'm going to have to do it to fit the kingpin in. Let's do that. In the end, I actually didn't have to scrape anything out. I just lined up this top hat washer and hammered it in, so that seems to have worked. And those of you who are paying attention will see I've gone for high ride height straight away, because the first place I'm going to be testing at is Wilton Mill with massive curbs. So here we go, original stub axles, looking shiny. So now we need to connect these two and connect them to the steering. we have a working steering system. I don't know if I put that together correctly. I'm not sure if that's supposed to go under or above here. We've got non-Ackerman for the first time, so hopefully that's kind of correct. But it feels smooth and it does what it's supposed to do. So happy with that. I'm going to put a little bit of fuel line around here just to make sure this doesn't bend the track rods if the steering goes all the way one side or the other. But we're kind of ready now to start putting on the metalwork around the front.
Just a little mini update to show you what we've done since I last spoke to you. We've done these little finishing touches. You add a little bit of fuel line around the steering column here, and it means when the steering wheel goes all the way to one side or the other, the track rod doesn't smash into the steering column and potentially damage it or scratch anything. At the front here, we've added this. So this is our pod bar clamp. Essentially, when we put the pod on, this allows us to remove it because it has this little gap down the bottom here, and that allows this to move up and down. And obviously we clamp it separately with two metal clamps. We'll get to that later. Now what's frustrating is, really the next step is to fit a seat and the floor. But the floor doesn't have its sticker on yet, so I'm going to have to fit it and then remove it. We'll do it anyway because we need to see how it all lines up. The seat is currently still fitted to my other cart. It's over in there, so I need to remove that. Might do that one tomorrow. Maybe we'll just try and carry on building up the front here and potentially move on to the bearings at the rear, but there's still quite a lot to do. Let's go for an easy win right now. Let's fit the pod bars because Alex at Powder Pros painted these a lovely gloss black. Normally they'd be chrome. I quite like the black. Let's fit them on and see how they look. Okay, so it is a huge mess in my garage, but I think we're done for tonight. Getting pretty late. We've done essentially all of the front end here. We've done the floor and we've also done the side pod bars. There's a whole lot more to do, not least of which is removing my seat from my other cart and getting that in. I think that's probably the next job because having the seat in means you can use that as a toolbox. You can put all of your tools in the seat rather than all over the floor like they currently are. And it's also quite a big job. It's something that needs to be right. So I think we'll do that next. I've had to do quite a lot of modifications to this floor. It looks a bit messy at the moment, but I will tidy it up before we're finished. You can see these jagged edges where I've actually had to cut the floor to fit. Nothing that I've got here really is made for this car, apart from the components that I was given by Project One, things like the stub axles. I'll crack on with this again tomorrow. Thanks for watching so far. If you're enjoying this build video so far, please consider liking and subscribing to see if we can get this thing over the line tomorrow. Right, it's another day in the garage and it is an absolute disaster zone in here. There is stuff everywhere. I'm not actually going to tidy it up. I'm going to just crack on. Now, yesterday I said I was going to fit the seat. I've got it in here loosely, but I've realised I can't actually position it correctly until I've got the axle in, because where the seat sits is relative to the rear axle, and we're going to use a guide to make sure we have that all correct. So it's going to be axle next, but before axle, I'm going to put the bumper in, because it looks like, again, hopefully quite an easy win, and it gets a thing off the table, gives me a bit more room, and then I can carry on working on some of the more complicated things. Let's go. So as with a lot of these things, bolts don't quite line up properly, and it's partly because the cart's been powder coated, and that means the holes aren't quite as big as they would have been originally. So you can see what I'm trying to do down here is get these 3 bolts into the bearing carrier, but they just don't line up. So what I'm having to do is effectively try and scrape some of the paint away and almost thread the bolts in through the paint, and hopefully then I'll get the right angle eventually. The bearing carriers are both in. I'm going to try and test fit the axle next. That's simply to try and get a position for the seat, and then we'll do all this properly a little bit later on. That was actually way easier than on an OTK, so I'm pretty happy with that. That went in really well. We're running a 1040M, so medium stiffness, 1 meter, 4 centimeters long, and it's hollow inside. What that means is I can now measure the distance from the back of the seat to the axle, and we can try and get this all lined up, ready to fit the seat properly. This is one of those really time-consuming jobs, but it has to be done right, so let's crack on with this. We've kind of done the back end here. I've measured it to the axle. It's, I think, pretty much where it's supposed to be. It's very, very difficult to get the seat accurate. So now we're going to do the front. Quite tricky here because the mounting points are not really the right angle to fit flush with the seat. So we're going to have to use some kind of rubberized mounts to bend this gap here because the bolt's not going to go straight through at the right angle. Let's give it a try. Okay, as with every job on this car, that was a real pain, but I'm really satisfied with what I've come up with there. Basically, the seat stays on the chassis on not the same angle as the seat itself. And so if I was to put anything rigid between the seat and the stay, it would have a horrible acute angle and probably snap something. I've taken a rubber bumper mount, I've cut it at an angle, and I've put that in as part of my washer setup. And that means it takes up the slack between the seat and the chassis. Next up, we're going to put on the rear bumper. Oh my God, the bumper was really easy. That went on super cleanly. I just put it on and tightened up the bolts. That's by far the simplest thing so far. Next up, something not quite so simple. The fuel tank doesn't fit. And that's because this universal mount isn't wide enough. So I'm going to have to try and manufacture something that fills in the gap. So annoyingly, that didn't work. It's this silly little job, like trying to create your own bracket for the fuel tank, that just saps an hour's worth of your time. So now I'm going to have to try and figure out a way of building a plastic piece that fits over the front of those chassis rails. So I will get back to you once I'm finished. There we go. I made this kind of plasticky thing here. I'll scrape the paint off. That used to be a chain guard, and now it's tight and the fuel tank can't go anywhere. So, okay, right, situation sorted. So next up is probably building the rear axle properly. And that means putting on the brake disc carrier and brake disc, sprocket carrier, and all of the surrounding things. Actually, because this isn't an inboarded axle like I'm used to, I only have to get the brake disc carrier in here, not a sprocket carrier. So that's actually slightly simpler than I was expecting. So let's crack on with that. Okay, I've kind of fitted the brake caliper and the axle and the bearing housings, and everything seems to work. I now need to just fit the brake master cylinder, try and make that fit. And then obviously we have to try and build up the brakes themselves, connect them to the brake pedal. But as a start, I'm pretty happy with that. So let's see if we can get that finished and get the bars on which hold the nacelle panel. And then we've really made quite a lot of progress today. I've managed to adjust the brake pads so that they're nice and flat. That's one thing that I was a little bit worried about. This is a reconditioned system, so it's basically like brand new pads. Pretty much everything on this car is essentially brand new. And now that's adjusted correctly. I've roughly attached the brake pedal itself with the brake bar, but that's not fully adjusted yet, but it works, and the brakes are bled and they work correctly. So the disc is lined up. I've also fitted the sprocket and sprocket carrier and the rear hubs, and we've got these really nice fancy adjustable rear hub keyways. Now this is so that the wheel doesn't move in when you're cornering hard and maybe they come slightly loose, and it means I can very accurately set my rear track width, and I know it's exactly the same on both sides. So I love little things like that. I told you there were going to be some modern additions here. I'm now going out for the evening, so I think that's it for today. I've got a very busy week, and it's going to be tough to get through more of this, but I'm desperate to get it finished. It's a new day, and I'm doing some more work on the car. And what I'm trying to do right now is fit the nose cone on, and it needs to be modified slightly because the edges of the clamp section, these four kind of built-in brackets on the front, they don't quite fit. There's a common theme here. So I'm just modifying them. I'm kind of cutting off the edges to see if I can fit them into the front brackets here, and then I can fit the nacelle panel and line it up. But I need the nose cone on before I can fit the nacelle panel so that I can see how it all lines up correctly. So let's go. Okay, so the front end is nearly back together and I'm really happy with the angles I've managed to get here. I need to pause and thank JB Kart Racing, who have sent a bunch of stuff for this build, and it's really going to set it off perfectly. The bright purple parts, similar to what I had on my old car, are going to look incredible. And the reason that I'm talking about them now is I'm actually just about to start using these custom coloured rubber washers that go between the floor tray and anything metal to stop it scratching or vibrating and working loose. So we're going to use these now. You're going to see me using more of these JB Kart Racing pieces as the rest of the build continues. Thanks to those guys. If you want your own custom 3D printed parts, head to jbkartracing.com, click the link below and use the code BRAD10 at checkout for 10% off. Right, let's carry on. The front end is basically done. What we can't do yet is the side pods, and that's because I need to know how far away they are from the tyres before I can drill mounting points. So what that means is I need to mount tyres to wheels. But what that means is I need to put bearings in the front wheels and I need to put valves in all four wheels, then fit the tyres. Then we can fit them to the cart and we can see what kind of space we've got to play with when it comes to fitting the side pods.
I've managed to get the one on the rear in very, very easily just by knocking it in with a mallet. The one this side looks like it's in, but when you actually take a close look inside the wheel, it's not flush up against the collar that it's supposed to sit next to. Hitting it harder just doesn't work. I've had it suggested to me to put a long bolt through the middle and wind that tighter and then effectively press the bearing in. We're going to try and do that. Wish me luck. Let's see if we can get these sorted so we can then put valves in them, get tyres on them, get it mounted to the car. Let's go.
And very happily, that worked. So our bearing is pushed in all the way. So I'll pop some lube on that bearing now just so I know it's definitely done. We'll do the other side and then we should be able to get some tyres on these wheels. Here we go. Okay, for this step, I need my valve puller tool and some nice fresh valves, and this is how you fit them. I'm going to try and show you here. We literally get this stubby little valve, we pop it through like this, grab the valve puller, that screws on the end, get a few turns on that, and then you simply bend that over the edge of the wheel and pull it, and through comes the valve, and that is as simple as that. We'll repeat that with the rears, and then we'll try and get some tyres on these. We can fit them to the cart. This is exciting, stuff's happening. Okay, time to fit some tyres. These are different from the Maxxis we were using in GX UK. These are Dunlops, and although they're a hard compound, they're not that grippy really. They've got pretty soft sidewalls, so quite easy to get these on, but let's just give it a try now. I'll try and show you the process. Essentially, what we're gonna do is we're gonna take the wheel, we'll push it into the top of the tyre. Once it's in one side, we'll then use our special tool to pull it through the other side, and then we inflate. There are no bead retainers on these, unlike our GX UK wheels, so there's one less step in this process. Should be quite straightforward. Let's give it a try. Okay, so tyres now all inflated. Let's fit these to the cart and get the bodywork positioned. Man, it is really, really cool to see this thing with wheels on. We could even put it on the floor and sit in it, but I'm not going to quite do that yet. I'm going to line up some bodywork and see how it fits, and then maybe drill some holes. Here we go. I've got the bodywork on. I discovered that the left side pod bars basically would scrape on the floor if I didn't modify them. So my really nicely powder coated black pod bar, I've had to destroy a bit because frankly the L bracket on the front is going to have to be cut off anyway. So I'm trying to get it roughly in position, but if you look down the side pod, you'll see a lot of the front tyre, and that's because the pod bar is really low to the floor, and if I was driving along it would just hit the floor or hit bumps and that kind of thing. The right hand side is completely fine. Again, this is just one of those things. I'm having to manufacture stuff as I go. I'm going to need to get someone to weld me on a new L bracket, and then I'll get these re-powder coated. But I injured myself several times during that process. I've smashed my hand with hammers and clamps and all sorts of stuff, but we're getting there. I'm slightly concerned that there seems to be quite a lot of positive camber on the front wheels when the cart's static. I don't know if it's supposed to be like that. Certainly not something I've done. It's just the geometry of the stub axles. So let's see, I've asked the guys at Project One and we'll see what they come back with. Okay, so after quite a lot of work, the cart is largely put together. Now I say that very specifically rather than built or finished because there is a heck of a lot more to do to it. But as it stands, I would call this phase 1 done. The last thing I'm going to do is put on the final side pod, but before I do that, I just want to show you some more modification / manufacturing or engineering we're having to do. We have a plan long term, which is to cut the L-shaped brackets off and re-weld them in a different position. For the moment though, so I can go testing in the short term, hopefully within the next month or so, we've simply snapped off the bottom part of the bracket on the front, and that means it shouldn't scrape on the floor. The side pods are still quite low, but I think they're going to be okay. I'm also going to try the OTK mounting method of using one of these little red plastic studs which sits in the side pod sleeve rather than having to put a bolt in, and then I'll use my JB Kart Racing side pod sleeves over the top to hold it in place exactly like on an OTK, and that then will allow the flexibility of the side pods to move and allow the chassis to flex, and also stops me having to put a nut and bolt in there. If we do end up needing more rigidity, I can then just put a bolt in there, so it's all nice and straightforward. And as a very last piece before this video ends, I'll put the exhaust mounting bracket on, because what that will signify is that the kart is then ready for the engines. Now, engines are not a thing we've really spoken about yet. I have bought a couple of engines, one for practice and one for racing. So in the next video, what you're going to see is me struggling to fit the engines, figuring out how they operate, working out how the carburetor and all the gaskets that go with that go together, hopefully firing it up. And you're also going to see this thing in its final livery, because it is not staying plain black. We have a full sticker kit on the way. So coming up in part 2, the end of the build and the first test session of this kart. So stay tuned for that. I'm going to fit the final pieces. Thank you so much for watching so far. If you've got any questions or comments about what you've seen in this video, please leave a comment below. Right, let's finish this off.